As always, I'm going to start with a prayer of gratitude and then a review of what is energy healing in a nutshell really quickly. And then we'll go into the topic of today's session, which is energy healing for digestion and metabolism. It's a really basic area, a basic topic for all of us, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time with this, especially with the brilliant light of awareness that radiates from this healing collective, all of you together, all of us together. We put our attention on these areas and new knowledge comes out and deeper understanding, and it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting for me. So thank you all for being with me tonight. Okay. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being this healing webinar and all of us together, for being all of our ancestors and the role of the ancestors in the presence of the physiology and all the habits and everything else we inherit from them. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom for blessing our time together and for being the connection between the absolute and the relative. May we work efficiently and profoundly and concisely. May the resources, technologies, and understandings required to uplift and uphold everyone's ability to master the energy healing process come forth through this session tonight, through all of us together. Thank you, everyone, for being with me. All right. Okay, so what is energy healing? I was thinking about a new definition of energy healing because I was imagining trying to describe to someone who's very highly skeptical, and it occurred to me that what energy healing really is, what we're really doing in these sessions, is education on the healing process. Understanding the healing process from the angle or perspective of the inner mechanics of how healing actually occurs. So these energy healing webinars, as well as my private consultations and every other service that I offer, is all the free material, the knowledge base, the YouTube, all that stuff, is essentially oriented towards educating anyone who is willing to look and listen on the very fine mechanics of how the energy healing process occurs. And really detail, as much detail as possible, like what actually makes energy healing. Of course, that involves focus of attention. It also involves accessing that fundamental field of pure being, which is basic to everything that manifests. Because what we're doing in energy healing is what we're understanding is that a particular type of transformation occurs in the physiology. And in order for any system or anything to undergo a transformation, it has to dissolve into the gap and then reemerge in a new form. So we're really looking in detail at that particular process of how what we know some current situation or circumstance or setting or symptom exists, seems so solid, right? And then it dissolves into a state of balance that allows it to reemerge as a new state or circumstance, a new situation. And that's the fundamental of healing, essentially, and any form of manifestation and all the creative process that gives rise to the diversity of our creation. That's the process. So we're looking at that process, but in these sessions, we're looking at that process in terms of healing functions and structures of the physiology. So obviously tonight, what we're looking at is the structure of the digestive system and also the functions of the digestive system. And how do those correlate with this fundamental of creation, which is the dissolving from the relative into the unmanifest absolute, and then the reemergence in the new, stronger, better form. We could say in a form that expresses the divine more perfectly. All right. So the first thing I'd like to do is take a deep dive into our collective. All of us here together, thank you everyone for being here. And see where the most effective focus of our attention will be right from the beginning. I also obviously have in mind the digestive system. So I'm checking in with everyone's digestive systems. When the light of awareness filters into some part of the physiology or some part of this relative field of creation, it illuminates details so that any blockage or imbalance that's sitting in the system anywhere casts a shadow. And the shadow is what is seen. It's the byproduct of the imbalance that is expressed as a symptom, for example. And certain areas are lighting up. And interestingly, circulatory system and the eliminative system, like the urinary system, kidneys, circulatory kidneys are lighting up, which I wasn't expecting that, but it's all good, and I'm grateful for the ride that is always provided by being in your presence. Circulatory system is the carrier of the nutrition, which is extracted from the food, right? Circulatory system is also the carrier of bliss, and to a certain degree, the circulatory system perpetuates bliss as well. It carries the bliss. We can think of the nutritive value, the oxygen that comes from our lungs, or the nutrients that come from the food that are carried through the circulatory system as forms of bliss, but also there's something about the way the circulatory system interfaces with the rest of the tissues of the body that supports the flow of bliss, because everyone's blood is carrying some nutritive value, but how receptive the tissues are is a byproduct of the relationship between the causal level of the physiology, accessed here through the heart Mahamarma, right? So connection to circulatory system right here. The causal level of creation and the source of creation. Because the source of creation is an infinite resource of all fulfillment. And the fulfillment that's radiating from the source of creation makes its first connection to the relative through the causal body, which is that finest level of the physiology. So this is the foundation upon which the resource is able to move through the entire system of manifestation and work its way out to the surface of creation. So we're looking at the foundation. That's a good place to start, the foundation. What I'm seeing is a self-referral loop of consciousness folding from the heart area and from the causal level of creation back into the absolute like that. So it's like a little curl. It's like a little curl of consciousness, a little loop of consciousness curling like that. And with each curl, there seems to be such a kind of poignant tenderness, gratitude and sweetness and love, but there's a poignancy in that curl. So when I see poignancy, this is Dorothy making an inference. When I see the poignancy, I realize that means that the curl has an all-inclusive value to it, that it includes both the sort of joyful, blissful elements of creation, and then also some of the breaking down and, demanifesting elements of creation. You get those two going together, you get a very kind of complete expression of intelligence, which is both beautiful and also kind of delicate at the same time. And the question is how to handle or deal with the aspects which feel as if they express loss or lack. So the first thing that's happening in this little curl or loop of consciousness that's taking place down at the causal level is a balance of the four pillars of Dharma. Because one of the pillars of Dharma is letting go or non-attachment, right? That's important. And if it's in balance, if it's balanced out with truth and knowledge, then just the right quality is let go, and just what you don't need is let go, and what you need is kept. And so that element of breaking down or letting go or dissolution can be present, but in the context of an evolutionary experience, something that pushes life forward or has a progressive element to it. Okay, now I'm feeling a little bit of energy that's kind of like an energy of excitation. And it's not quite bliss yet, but it's kind of like an anticipating type of energy, like, oh, I see where this is going and this is good. And we can see this also. I was thinking quite a bit. Some brilliant questions came in this last week. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. And one particularly deep question came in today that was like really, really got me thinking. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the quality of attention that everybody brings to these sessions. It's quite phenomenal. But the question had to do with the relationship of Agni and Soma and Marut, which was another element that I hadn't really put much attention on before. And I did look that up, Marut. And according to Vedic tradition, Maruts are the children of Rudra and Aditi, I believe. I think it's Rudra and Aditi, if I remember correctly. And they're fierce, powerful warrior-like. Different records count them in different numbers, anywhere from 27 to 60 times 60. But they are responsible for huge transformations, particularly having to do with weather. So when I think of Marut, I think of, and this person who asked the question too, he was getting his information from Dr. Mishra, who is an Ayurvedic physician, that he was thinking of a brilliant analysis here in terms of the etheric space containing Soma and Agni and allowing their flow and balance. Beautiful, beautiful description of that. So if we think of, and that kind of fits with the description that I found online of Marut as being the Maruts being the subtle intelligence that sits behind the great environmental transformations, particularly storms and like thunder and lightning and rain and that kind of thing. And we know that it's that which nourishes the earth and gives the, right, nourishing, as in nourishing value, as in nutrients from our food also nourishing our bodies. But on an earth level, and here we're looking at this a principle that as is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. So we can look at the same principle from several different perspectives, thus giving ourselves a broader comprehension of that. The Maruts are the intelligence, the creative intelligence that's behind environmental phenomenon, which is the nourishing effect, which allows the food to grow and it comes out as a byproduct. We know that the rains come as a byproduct of right action. Yagya. Yagya means action which does not incur negative karma, essentially, which means dharmic action, right? The 4 pillars of dharma. Action which is aligned with dharma gives rise to balance in the environment so that the land gets the rains on time and it doesn't get too much rain or too little rain, but it gets everything in proper order. So the Maruts are the intelligence that organizes. We could say that's an organizing principle behind the intensity of nature's expression that is responsible for the nourishment of the earth and the food that we eat. Nothing grows without the water. It needs the sunshine, but it also needs the water, right? So the sunshine's like the Agni, or fire element, and the water is that cooling element, like the Soma. And another point that this my dear friend brought out, brilliant point, was that we can also think of Soma and Agni, that soft cooling element and that fiery element, as polarities. We can think of them as opposites. So, of course, you know me, I went back to my some of the beautiful knowledge that's been gifted me by Vedic scholars in the community, and I looked at the relationship between Soma and Agni at the very fine level of consciousness, because these are very, very fundamental principles that are absolutely behind our digestive process, but are also behind all forms of manifestation. And what I found was that there are these 6 different expressions that evolve from the unmanifest. There are 6 different expressions, and the first 2 give rise to the environment. They're kind of like they give rise to the Devic intelligence that's responsible for the manifestation of the universe, and that includes Agni is in there. But then they also give rise to Soma and Ojas. And Soma and Ojas are absolutely associated with digestion, particularly Ojas. And both of them are associated with proper, healthy digestion. So everyone's getting downloads right now, everybody in our Healing Collective, for the details associated with Soma and Ojas and how the mechanics of the body's metabolic system can enhance or support increased production of these very fine elements at that very, very abstract level of creation, because we're really talking about a level of creation which is prior to manifestation. Prior to manifestation, let's put it in context. At the deepest level of creation, we have unmanifest being, and the goal of our healing sessions is to express unmanifest being all the way through to the manifest level, right? That's sort of one of the big aims of what we're doing, is we know that the source of creation resides within, but we want that all the way out to the surface, and we want to integrate it at every single particle of our being, all the way to the surface. Okay, so unmanifest being has the aspect of itself that's folded in on its own nature, Nirguna Brahm, so it's like a resting state, infinite silence, and then it's got an infinite dynamism side of its nature where it is awake within its own nature, but not yet manifested. So you have these 2. And there's like a little wave of energy that rolls between unmanifest silence and unmanifest dynamism. There's a little wave right in there. So it's like, am I one big wholeness, or am I experiencing myself? Because as soon as I'm experiencing myself, I become the experiencer in the process of experience, right? So then all of a sudden it's not 1, but it's 3. And so there's this flow that goes back and forth between 1 and 3 at that level. And that flow creates a little friction. And that little friction is Agni, which is another name for fire. It's the fire of it's the same term that's used for the fire of digestion in the body. And yet we're looking at it from a very primordial level, from a very fundamental level, from the level before it manifests. Because right down in there, where the Agni isn't manifest yet, but it's kind of like this little unmanifest friction that's flowing back and forth between one and many and one and many and one and many. A lot of dynamics can be identified. Dynamics can be identified. Specifics can be identified. And one of the blessings from the physicists that I know have shared with me, and I think it's one of the brilliant observations of the laws of nature at that really fine level, is that at that level of creation, measurement isn't linear. It isn't linear. It has more of a circular type of, in other words, how the different elements react and interact with each other. It's not so much like A gives rise to B, which gives rise to C, which gives rise to D, like that. It's more like loops where one can be found inside the other, but the other can be found inside the one, like that. So it's kind of like a curling. It's like creation is curling in on its own nature at that level. So I feel like we've kind of gotten a little bit away from our physical digestion, so we want to get back to that. We've kind of gotten off onto this area of great abstraction, but it is so valuable to understand. And we know this is what happens on Friday night, is we go into a deep foundation, establishing a foundation of understanding for very powerful healings. And I can see in tonight's webinar, we're going into a deeper, much more abstract level of expressing this foundation than ever before in any webinars before, which means the dynamism of the healings that come out are going to be really something. So anyway, and it all came out of this incredible question, by the way, which is coming from, one of the great, great thinkers of our time and one of the great men who blesses our collective with his awareness and his thought. So we can look at Soma and Agni as two aspects of the process of the digestion. That friction represents the fire of digestion. And then the soma is that softness, that cooling softness that allows the nutritive value of the food to be integrated with the body. I'm just feeling that in the system, these two polarized values and how they really evolve as part of the same unified system. And that unification of the polarized values is coming in as a download of balance for everyone's physiologies at a very, very deep level of the physical form. Also, another question came up, somebody else earlier, and I don't seem to have that question here, but oh yes, I know where it came up. Same person, earlier question regarding Soma and Ojas. And so I took a big, deep look into that. I'm thinking for a minute, should I go this way with our conversation or that way? I think let's go a little more concrete, then we'll go back to Soma and Ojas, which is more abstract. Okay, because we need to oscillate a little bit back and forth between the very abstract and the concrete in order to integrate and stabilize everything. So awesome question from another really deep thinker and a woman who has transformed herself into a great healer over the course of our webinars. God bless you all, because many of you have done that, and I really appreciate it. And her point is that she felt that when personal power is lost, then the digestive fire in the belly was extinguished, hopefully only temporarily, because they're both connected to the third chakra. Great correlation, absolutely beautiful. So since we're talking about Agni or fire, we want to look at the role of fire, particularly in this midsection of the physiology where we have the organs of digestion that are associated with heat, liver, gallbladder, stomach, very acidic in the stomach, right? pancreas, spleen. And in previous webinars, I have made a sort of a brief reference to the relationship between the story of the whole digestive system. And here, as I'm saying, whole digestive system, I'm coming back with my awareness to everyone's digestive system. We're looking at that, the alimentary canal from the entrance to the exit. And the story of the processing of food from being a unique piece of food. Oh, I was thinking, oh, I should have a bowl of fruit and I can like hold up an apple or something like that. The food starts as a unique structure, right? And then it goes through this incredible transformative process to eventually uplift itself and our bodies as finer, more perfect expressions of divinity. So it starts out already as an expression of divine intelligence, cosmic intelligence, and then it becomes even more divine through the eating process. And thank you. You are such a dear. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Here's a nectarine or something. Yeah, so you can see how beautiful and perfect and like such an expression of divinity this lovely piece of fruit is, right? But how many of you have seen those, what do they call them? They're like, back in the old days, before it was discovered that x-rays were like bad for you, they would do x-rays of people like eating bananas and stuff like that, and you could see how the food changed shape as it went inside the body, right? So I was thinking about that and following that story from the mouth down through the body. And what I noticed is that the further the food goes through the body, the more malleable and abstract its overall shape is. Like right now, this has a very nice, very concise shape even, and concise color. And then as it moves through the digestive tract, it becomes far less concise. It becomes just a mushy mess. And then when it goes through the transition of the small intestine into the bloodstream, it really spreads out a lot. And then from the nutrient-rich blood goes into the liver, so it's still kind of contained within a space, right? Because the liver has its own unique space. But then as it moves from there into the kidneys and then also up into the heart. And when it hits the heart, it spreads out over the whole body. And the shape of this object, or whatever object you happen to be eating at the time, becomes the shape of the whole body. Essentially, it goes all the way out to all the little capillaries and all the fine levels of the physiology. As it passes, I was referencing the hero's journey. As it passes through this hot section of the physiology, that's the part of the hero's journey where the hero has still retained some form, right? Because you think of how formed the food is when it's coming in here. It's still kind of together. It's still like holding itself together, sort of. And then it comes to this place where it is exposed to resources. And these are resources of Agni, because at that level, the fires the enzymes and hormones and the different neurochemicals which break the food down into its next layer of dissolution. These are powerful tools. These are our power tools, which the hero goes into that place in his journey where he meets the wise, right? He meets like a wizard or a guru or somebody wise, and that person gives him a gift. And the gift is like a gift of power. In the Ramayana, I think Ram receives like magic weapons that he's going to use later to destroy his enemy and that kind of thing. So those enzymes represent the tools, the power tools that we use to affect the important changes that are required by the challenges that we face in our existence. And we've talked many times on the webinars about the use of these tools with discrimination and measured regularity, right? Because the tools are powerful, and if they're misused, they can cause damage. But if they're used concisely, so for those individuals that have challenges with over acidity in the body, for example, here is receiving for all these people any over acidity or any tendency or propensity to over acidity or allergic sensitivity to foods which cause a histemic effect in the physiology. For all people who have any kind of effect like that going on in the physiology, this is where the download of information for engaging the tools of heat in this middle part of the body with this measured regularity and fine discrimination. And that's so good. It's so good. It ties in a little bit to a question which I'm going to address tomorrow, which is an auto brewery effect that takes place in the physiology. But I think we're going to go into a healing for that tomorrow, because that's from one of our Europeans, and he won't be with us tonight. And I want to be sure to answer that when it's a really common anomaly that many, many people suffer from and don't even know it. Even I had it. I didn't know I had it. I found out because somebody that I love very much had it, and they did some research, and they found out that they were told by their doctor that it's a very rare disease, but that some people, when they eat sugar in the presence of fermented foods, the byproduct is the body producing alcohol. And I mean, I actually know people, I know people who have had sclerosis of the liver who never drank a drop of alcohol in their lives, right? It happens. Why? Because their bodies are turning that sugar into the alcohol inside. So anyway, we're going to address that in more detail tomorrow, because I want to honor my dear spiritual brother who sent me that question. But for tonight, let's go ahead and get everything set up and stabilized so that the work of the fire in the middle part of the physiology is so balanced. It's so well aligned with dharmic action that any problems that might arise from these very powerful tools that exist within our bodies, the hormones and the enzymes and the stomach acids and all that stuff, that the work of those tools is like the work of an artist or a surgeon. You know, sometimes artists also, they work with kind of dangerous materials, right? Like glazes can be toxic, or, you know, different kinds of carving knives or something like that. But they use them like a master, right? In such a way that something exquisitely beautiful emerges. Thank you for the vision of the artist, because I realize that part of the story is the establishment of a Dharma matrix for each of the organs of the central part of the physiology. And we want that, and I will include a Dharma. Please, can you make a note, or I can make a note to include a Dharma matrix? I should have, put it in here so I could flash it up on the screen, but I didn't know I was going to come across it. So I'm making a note to self to include that. Those 4 pillars standing together, and I'm looking into everyone's physiology, all these heat organs right here in the center of the body. And that can even include the kidneys, because the kidneys are back there also under the influence of the 3rd chakra. Loving you guys. So Dharma matrix around each of the organs. But what I'm seeing, what I'm asking being, is how can the 4 distinct pillars of the Dharma matrix be appreciated by us at such a fine level, such a delicate level of awareness, that they're really fully integrated as one. So that, and it's interesting because what you have there, it's so interesting. Oh, I'm having brain explosions. Okay, so we were talking earlier about how you've got this relationship between 3 and 1, right? Down at the unmanifest level of creation. It's either one wholeness, or it's one wholeness experiencing itself as pure experience. But the Dharma matrix has these 4 pillars, And the one of the pillars is pure truth. And that pure truth pillar represents essentially that aspect of pure truth, pure knowledge, pure wisdom, the one. It represents the one. So the 4 pillars of the Dharma matrix can be integrated from a perspective of 3 versus 1, with the pillar of truth standing as the one and the other 3 integrating with that pillar of truth. And as that's happening, I'm feeling, particularly on the right side of the body, I understand there's the heart is on the left, right? But then there's almost like a sort of a subtle mirror heart on the right that's like at a subtle level. And I'm feeling from the subtle heart an impulse of such sweetness and gratitude and I guess appreciation. There's a little thread of integration in there too. There's some integrating happening. So there's an integration that's happening throughout the heart Mahamarma area between the actual physical heart and a kind of a mirror image of the physical heart that sits on the right side of the physiology. And that's interesting that that's happening, because we know that one of the great points of integration for expansion of consciousness is up in the brain. That I don't know how many saw the wonderful woman who gave a TED talk called My Stroke of Insight. I think it was called My Stroke of Insight. It was a woman who was a neurological scientist. Oh yes, the other people have heard of her. Yeah, I'm getting raised hands over here on the internet. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering her name right now, but she was quite brilliant. I see lots of other people raising hands, right? And what she did was she had a stroke, but because she was a neurological scientist, she actually understood what was happening while she was having the stroke, and she experienced it from the inside. Oh, thank you, Jill Taylor. Thank you, darling. So her name has been given to everyone. Her name's Jill Taylor. She's got a TEDx talk, which is just brilliant. I strongly encourage. When at the end of her talk, or maybe it was in the middle. Oh, yes, it was in the middle when she was having the stroke, and she described what it was like for her awareness to be stabilized on the right side of her brain and then stabilized on the left side. And the right side, and she kept like kind of flipping back and forth between the right and left sides of the hemispheres of the brain. And as she described the difference of reality between the right and left hemispheres of the brain, I was flashing on the perspective of wholeness versus the perspective of the parts. The perspective of the transcendent versus the perspective of the relative. Perspective of these opposites, these polar opposites. That's what I was experiencing. So what I feel is taking place right now in our physiology, the reason I brought up Jill Taylor was because there's a balancing that's taking place on the right and left sides of the physiology right here. Oh, and we remember the hero's journey, right? So the hero is cast out from his comfy little home, his comfy home space. He's cast out into this place where he has to be hyper alert. We know one of possibly the most sensitive part of the whole body is right here inside the mouth. Like all the senses come together. You know, you see the food, I guess, you see it before it enters the mouth. But once it's inside the mouth, all the other senses are included, right? You hear the sound that it makes to crush that food. Sometimes it's crunchy, sometimes it's soft. You feel it in the mouth, you taste it in the mouth, and you smell it right there. And so there's a very rich sensory experience that takes place, which correlates precisely with the moment from when our nectarine hero casts out onto his journey and to his or her journey, has to be hyper alert, because all of a sudden what was expected is not what's happening. It was like, well, I was just going to fall to the earth and become a tree. No, there's another story, another storyline. Plan B, going to be chewed up. So the next thing is, after being cast out into the wilds of the world, our hero is naturally drawn because as we know, he who is awake inside, knowledge seeks him out, right? So the hero is naturally drawn toward the wise. And what happens is the food passes right through the heart center of the body, which is our wise understanding center of the body. And what happens is the wise understanding center, the heart, the teacher, the wizard, the guru, the wise person who bestows the gift of power on our hero, is that experience of understanding as the food passes through the esophagus leads the food to that place of expression where the tools are received for dealing with the problem, which is, how do I find my way back to divinity, a larger expression of divinity? So this, I just want to go back and put a little more attention on this integration that's occurring between the right and left sides of the physiology, because this is luscious and wonderful, and it's happening in the part of the digestive process where we connect with wisdom. In fact, the thyroid, right, is an organ which is, you can think of the thyroid as a very wise organ. All these structures in the neck, the vocal mechanism is, and up to the mouth, is responsible for creating order out of chaos, which is kind of what I'm busy doing over here at this end of the camera. So that ability to create order from chaos is also a kind of a teacher quality, right? It's sort of a guru quality that the individual experiences, oh, the wholeness of creation, how do I make sense of it? And then if we can give aspects of it names and understand it, then it makes sense. And then here, the thyroid is it's the organ that monitors the way in which the food is breaking down through the alimentary canal, and is giving also resources come right from the thyroid as well, right? T4 and T3, these thyroid enzymes, or hormones, thyroid hormones, which support the digestive process, and they support, yes, thank you, they support the healthy functioning of the digestive organs. So they help the other organs do their thing. So all that, so it's like the hero gets to meet with many teachers along the way. He meets with one teacher who helps here, and then goes through the big heart center, where it's like, you could say the unified home of all teachers. And the reason this area is considered the unified home, why I'm seeing another brain explosion going on right now, home of all teachers, is because this is also where the respiratory system sits, right? And the respiratory system is, in a nutshell, representative of the relationship between individuality and universality. Y'all know I've talked about that before in the past, and you can go on my website, making another note for everybody. I'll send a few links for those of you that this is new information regarding the blog that I wrote about that. Because I don't want to take this is our precious healing time, essentially. So as much as you can tell, I absolutely adore the theoretical side of this process, I also know that this is a precious time for us to get in and do some great healing as well. So I will send that information to you. And for those who are watching this later online on YouTube, go to my website, my knowledge base, look up respiratory system on the knowledge base, and you will find that blog. You can also look up Dharma on the knowledge base and find that blog, which I will be sending to people as well. Or maybe we can put them as links at the bottom of the video. That would be nice to do that. It would be kind. So her question, my friend's point that there's a correlation between digestive fire and when a person goes through an experience that makes them feel as if they lost their personal power, that there seems to be a correlation, at least for her experience, with the loss of digestive fire and power of digestion as well. And that just makes such incredible sense to me. I really, really appreciate that you brought those two together. Thank you so much. Now, she goes on to say that she thinks that a lot of times, in a lot of cases, power is given away because people think that they're doing that for the greater good, as in being selfless. And I would like to add on to that another very socially acceptable way that people give away power is they put the authority for their own experience in the hands of others. There's an illusion there. There's illusion. So we're right down here in the fiery belt of fiery organs in the middle of the body, and we're looking for illusion, looking to clear illusion. And one of those illusions is that it's more efficient. It's more efficient if there's a mess to give someone else the responsibility and or blame for dealing with that mess. So that's one side of the paradigm. And the other side of the paradigm is the one that was brought up by my friend, which is probably closer to her experience, which is being such a compassionate support to others that you allow them to draw or leech or exploit your energies. I'm just feeling it through the group. I'm feeling all the different scenarios. And sometimes it goes back and forth. Sometimes people have both, and that's okay. However it comes up for you, however it crops up or manifests. We're working with that energy right now, clearing the illusion, but with it is just such a hotbed. My mouth wanted to say such a hotbed of discordant feelings that go along with it. So, so addressing those, and I'd say along with both of those scenarios that are associated with the giving away of personal power, illusion. There are cultural constructs that support both of those ways of dealing with the situation. And as we all know, in previous webinars, we've also looked at really at a more macroscopic level, I guess, at a larger level. We've looked at energies that exist within the web of life that are oriented towards allowing and supporting people to be exploited. Allowing people and supporting people to say, oh yeah, I will take control of your situation and you can just pretend to not be responsible for your experience. Reclaiming personal power is the hardest part about reclaiming personal power, is accepting that our experience, even down to experiences that don't seem to be self-chosen, such as birth defects or family circumstances or socioeconomic circumstances into which a person may have been born. Any of these, which people often feel, well, I have nothing, I have no control over that. Even these have their source, have their foundation in the source of creation and the source of ourselves. And karma is behind all of these things. Karma is behind it all. And personal karma is behind it all. And there are answers. Even for something like a birth defect, there are answers. There are answers. There are solutions. So it's not to say that even these things are outside a person's control. But it is to say that the willingness to take responsibility for one's own experience, whatever that is the solution for gaining liberation from the limitations of that experience. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to say it again in a slightly different way because I agree, it's a great point. So my husband has a dear, dear friend. I've never mentioned on these webinars, but what a sweet man. They went to college together, and when he was getting his master's degree, he had a terrible car accident. He was engaged to get married. He was about to become a doctor. He had a big, beautiful life ahead of him. He got in a car accident, hit his head, and was paralyzed on half his body for the rest of his life. So from age 20 to when he passed away, when he was in his mid-60s, he couldn't move half his body, and he lived in a rest home with the aged. And you can imagine that there was a lot of resentment about that, and there was a lot of feeling like that wasn't really his fault. And his father believed that because he sued the doctor who saw him and had a huge settlement from that, because the father believed that it was the doctor's fault that his son did not recover properly. There's a lot of blaming that went on. But here's the bright side of the story. This dear man learned meditation very early on. Very shortly after that, my husband was already practicing meditation, and he knew it was something that a person could do even if they were in a hospital bed or even if they were in a wheelchair. So this very sweet man learned meditation. And his dear sister sent us a letter after he passed away and said that she attributed the meditation that he'd been practicing for so many decades to the fact that he never let his illness create bitterness. Instead, he used the experience as an opportunity to express his goodness at every turn and to bless all who came in contact with him and evolve an extremely loving heart. And we can see that if somebody has something bad go on when they're 20 that carries through all the way to their passing when they're 60, that life story could have been very different. Could have been a very, very different story. But it turned out to be a victorious story. And he took what he had and he did a lot. He went to the gym twice a week with a trainer. That was a big settlement. So he was able to afford all the help and all the care he could possibly need. And, he had a trainer, and he was very well cared for. And he made a lot of very deep connections with all the people who cared for him, so that when he passed, there were many, many people that mourned and grieved his passing. And he did liberate from that prison. He did liberate, and he had to liberate through passing out of the physical body, but he did it victoriously rather than doing it in a state of the opposite of victorious, whatever that would be. He could have died just a bitter, angry, like grouchy person that nobody wanted to even be around, that had sort of tortured all of his caregivers for years, but he didn't. It was a completely different story. So this is another way to look at this idea that a circumstance arises, could be a very, very difficult circumstance, and rather than blaming, one takes a certain amount of responsibility and says, okay, so what am I getting from this? What's the gift that this has to give me? And then move with it and work with it. And as a result, his passing was extremely peaceful. It was just, he just fell asleep one day and didn't wake up. It was really peaceful. It was really beautiful. So he was just given, and I know, going in and checking in on him, it was a very beautiful, beautiful, beautiful experience for him to be liberated from that physiology in such a gentle, tender way. Empowering. It's empowering. This is the empowerment section of the physiology. This is this download that everyone is receiving for, first of all, Dharma matrices for all of the organs of the power center. And that brings all those organs into a state of functioning where every action is aligned with evolution. And then there's within the Dharma matrix, there's an integration that takes place where the parts, the four pillars of the Dharma matrix come together as wholeness. So I would say this is a very delicate expression of Dharma, very abstract, like very close to Dharma as its source. And what I'm seeing happening there is the Dharma in that condition, it gets right into the mechanism of the creative process. At that point, it's able to be part of this dynamic system that takes place in the level of creation before the manifestation springs forth. To me, it looks like it's sitting in the gap between the unmanifest and the causal level of the physiology, right there. And it's as if Dharma is bouncing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's so integrated and it's so complete in its expression there that it can just sit right down there at that really fine level of creation and just hold space. It's as if it's holding space in both the absolute and the relative at the same time, because that bounce back and forth is like at infinite speed. Yeah, and what I am noticing is that's happening is it's affecting ojas in the body. It's creating more ojas in the body, because ojas is the final byproduct of the digestive system, the digestive process. And I did have chart to show everybody on that, and I also see that we're coming close to our time, and I also see that we've got some questions. Oh yes, so beautiful, beautiful. So I'm being asked, what are the other three pillars of the Dharma matrix? These are compassion, austerity, and orderliness or purity, cleanliness. So you have truth, and that couples together with compassion, pardon? Ahimsa, thank you. Ahimsa, tapas, and sattva, is that right? Ahimsa, tapas, and sattva?
Purity with the orderliness. Was it maybe shawit?
I don't know.
Sattva was the first.
Oh, sattva is truth?
It's truth.
Is knowledge, truth,
Yeah,
knowledge.
Yeah,
Sattva is truth. And then tapas is the ability to let go or be non-attached. And we need to talk more about that too, because attachments are the consciousness correlate to mucus in the body. Satya. Okay. Beautiful. I'm also looking at this. Hang on, everybody. Oh yes, so the question is coming from California. Is this space where Dharma is radiating back and forth the same etheric space as between Agni and Soma? No, this is a very interesting point though. It's a very, and we're really splitting hairs here, but oh, I love to split hairs. So, so thank you for asking that question. So this has to do with states of consciousness. This has to do with states of consciousness. That from more like waking, dreaming, sleeping states of consciousness, the gap between unmanifest and manifest, the big important gap, sits between these deep levels and then the whole manifest field of creation here. So that's where the gap is, and that's where the Dharma matrix is vibrating back and forth. However, in higher states of consciousness, a more significant gap is identified, and that's the gap that's at the unmanifest level of creation that sits between wholeness and wholeness knowing itself as the parts. And that gap is really only, I would say, directly experienced in higher states of consciousness. And that's the gap where Soma and Agni are, from where Soma and Agni are emerging. Does that make sense? Thank you for that cool question. And yeah, that had been actually, the reason I'm excited to bring it out to you guys is that was a question that had been in my mind for a really long time, because I was seeing both gaps, right? And I'm like, well, which one's like the gap? like the important cap. And I realized that, thank you again to the physicists, we had another physics meeting earlier, a more private one than the last one. I'm looking forward to doing actually a webinar on the relationship of physics and consciousness to bring out some of the lovely, juicy, beautiful material that evolves from that. But anyway, we're not doing a physics webinar now, we're doing a digestive webinar. So let's get back to digestion. But anyway, thank you for that beautiful question. And yes, that's all the questions. Great. Okay. Mucus. Mucus forms around undigested particles of food in the physiology. This, of course, also ties into tomorrow's point about the autobrewery. But in the meanwhile, let's just look at mucus a little bit. Mucus is part of the body's defense system for dealing with that which the body does not want to deal with. And that brings me to another really important point that ties into this, and that is that our bodies like to keep our blood kind of clean. So there's a natural process in the physiology that if we, for example, if we eat too much of something, like say somebody like, got a food coma from eating too much ice cream or something, like really intense, some kind of very high concentrated sugar or something like that, then what happens is the body doesn't want that much sugar in the system. So what the body will do is it will kind of filter out that sugar and it will store it as fat so that it keeps the blood running at a certain kind of comfy zone or a comfy level of balance of sugars and balance of other nutrients. And I wanted to bring that out because I feel as if this webinar, maybe we'll look at it more tomorrow because we're getting close to our time, but is a wonderful opportunity to address some issues that are related to weight as well. But we're kind of easing into that right now, talking about mucus in the body. So another way that the body deals with that, if the particles are large enough, if the particles are small and they're down at the molecular level, then the blood there's this filtering process that goes on in the blood, and then the excess material is filtered off into fat, and that a lot of that process happens in the liver. Whereas if the particles are larger, like say you eat something and you eat part of the wrapper or something like how many, what is it, spiders a person's supposed to ingest in their life when they're sleeping or something? I don't know. Anyway, you eat something that the body doesn't like. You eat something that the body doesn't like. Then what happens is the body will pack some mucus around it, and it makes it kind of slippery, and it helps it just kind of move through the system without getting stuck and without having to deal with it. So mucus. Okay. Checking, because we're in the question and answer period, so I'm checking questions as they come in. The problem is if there's a buildup of too much, particularly if digestion is weak and not enough fire of digestion, too much buildup of undigested food in the body, then this undigested food does attract and cause an excess production of mucus in the body, but it also ends up getting stored in all sorts of places. If it's at that larger molecular level, larger than the molecular level. And the body goes into overproduction of mucus, and the mucus has its own kind of clogging effect in the system. And all of that centers around the when I look at attachments energetically, we got to this from the question about the other pillars of Dharma, right? Because one of them is tapas, or non-attachment. That this quality of attachment looks energetically very much the way mucus looks physically. It's a kind of a cloudy, sticky, energy. When I see that cloudy, sticky energy in someone's energy field, I think, oh, it's attachments. You know, it's just kind of, they go together. They go together. So even for the subtle energies, which are imbalances, there can be physiological correlates. So I'm looking. It's interesting. I love how when we do healings together in the group, almost every time it doesn't go the way I thought it was going to go, which I love that. I love that because it means Dorothy a new territory too. So I was thinking that the attachments were likely in the circulatory system, right? But no, I'm seeing for those individuals out here who have a little bit more excess production of mucus in the physiologies in the intestines, small intestines instead. Small intestines. So we're going there. And what's happening is the role, of course, of the small intestines is to do a lot of sorting and identifying of material in the body. And we know that that's happening at both a physiological level with the food, but it's also happening at more of an energetic level with all the information that comes to us from the universe. Ooh, and I'm seeing the balancing work, the healing that we can do now for the small intestine to also be very, very helpful for those individuals who have extra sensitivities to environmental information or input, which makes them uncomfortable. So that means chemical sensitivities, electromagnetic sensitivities as well. And what's happening is very interesting. I'm seeing the healing impulse or the healing function is emerging from the heart area, and it's emerging from these two sides of the heart area, the side where the actual real heart is and the side where the mirror image of the heart is. And these two sides are working together in coordinated fashion to produce a particular balanced energy frequency, a holistic energy frequency that includes the full range of order and chaos, if you will, the full range of what we consider to be good and not good, or what we consider to be aligned with natural law or not aligned with natural law, we consider to be evolutionary or non-evolutionary. And what's emerging is appreciation on both sides. Appreciation, recognition, acceptance, both sides, the whole range of that picture of life expression, divine expression in our universe is being embraced as a wholeness because of these two similar and yet distinct qualities of consciousness, or we could say causal level light medicine type energy is being produced from the heart area. Because we know that mucus also has a value, right? It's, in a sense, attachments support the maintenance of life. If there were zero attachments, like none of us would be here. It's that Rajas quality, right? Right? Because if we didn't care to be here, why would we be here? I could go into large descriptions of that. But belief is very much, I will just like to say in a nutshell, belief is very much a player in our maintenance, the maintenance of life and what we think of as life being meaningful and important and keeping us here. And she's saying from a Chinese, traditional Chinese medicine point of view, small intestine and heart share the same meridian, meaning they work synergistically. Isn't that brilliant? Wow. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because the Chinese medicine is very honorable, very ancient and honorable tradition of medicine. And, you know, within the Chinese medicine, we're working with these major meridians that run through the body. She's making reference to meridians. And so, Mm. Yes. Yes. So, okay. Okay. So download is coming in, obviously, when I'm making those kind of noises. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for interpreting. um, parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system, which kicks into gear anytime healing is happening. And I was looking at this lovely diagram, which I promise tomorrow, everybody, I will put the diagram up on my green screen so y'all can see it. And I didn't do that today, and please forgive me. I put other diagrams up, which I didn't use, but you got to enjoy this pretty picture instead. Anyway, but the parasympathetic nervous system is the main healing structure of the nervous system. It's like the main area of the nervous system. We talked about this last time, that activates when the body goes into healing mode. And it also has these very nice connections to the heart. So you'll see in the chart, to the heart, to the intestines. But this energy is kind of rolling from the parasympathetic nervous system, which is up here in this area, down into the heart area, and then down to the intestines. And this light medicine being produced in the heart area is moving to the intestines, and it's shining the light of compassionate understanding, which of course is balanced, right? Because we got our Dharma matrix. We got our Dharma matrix integrated, which means that compassion is integrated with truth, so that it's working in an evolutionary manner, not in an enabling manner. Boy, that's a lot of vowels at once. For the intestines, and for the entire microbiome sitting in the intestines. And one of the things that's happening here is I'm seeing part of the flavor or the energy in the light medicine has this amazing capacity to really dissolve both mucus and also the toxins that are associated with those little mucus bubbles that are moving around in our body. There's an energy that dissolves. I know by doing a little bit of research into Ayurveda that there's also a great deal of Agni that sits in the small intestine. That's another one of the seats of Agni in the body. So this is a redirecting of the Agni energy in the small intestine to be more oriented towards the purification process. And what I'm seeing is dissolving attachments ancestrally. So there are patterns and habits of having particular types of attachments that are inherited. And this inherited information has affected the functioning of the small intestine in these present body physiologies. And those attachments that go back to the ancestors were more appropriate, I would say, in previous generations. For instance, way back in the day, before there were like stores, before you could go to the store and get food, right? Then people had to eat all they could whenever the opportunity was available, right? So some hunt and there's some food and everybody eats until they can eat no more. And then they don't know when the next time they're going to get something nice to eat. Whereas these days, if we did that every time we had food available, that would be like every meal, and that would not be good. So some of the attachments are simply no longer appropriate for these physiologies. And with that, there's an honoring. I see how that coming together, those two heart energies are working, because something was appropriate and now it's not appropriate. So it doesn't mean it's bad and it doesn't mean it's inappropriate. It just means that according to the needs of the moment, we need to make an adjustment. And we know that a great deal of the cravings that we experience come from the microbiome. So this is a reformatting of the intention of the microbiome to act in accord with the needs of the human body to go through periods of both emptiness and fullness. And it's nice if we can do that within a 24-hour period. Sometime in the 24-hour period, empty, sometime full, and be able to keep that nice balance and that flow back and forth so that these physiologies are better expressions of divinity. And as we know, divinity is, its fundamental structure is this amazing flow back and forth between wholeness and its parts, between fullness and emptiness, right? The fullness of being, of unmanifest being, and all the emptiness that's necessarily part of the world of boundaries. That's for the intestines. Great. And I'm just feeling that now we've come to the end of our hour. So I'm just letting awareness, watching the awareness of the group kind of settle in on that as a final point. There were a lot of really juicy pieces of information that I really wanted to bring out to you guys in this webinar, and I didn't get to them today. So I'm glad we're going to meet again tomorrow. And of course, those of you who won't be with me lifetime tomorrow will get the recordings. Everyone will get. So please do check out tomorrow's webinar, because there's going to be some good, useful, much more practical, I would say, healings and technologies and information coming out then. And we will talk about the microbrewery, and we will also come back because there are still a few questions I didn't answer tonight. All right, thank you all for being with me. It's been a wonderful, as always, a wonderful, wonderful time to be with all of you, and a great expansion of understanding and integration of knowledge regarding the very, very fine mechanics of the way we heal ourselves, and in this case, the way we digest. Thank you. Thank you for a lot of love messages coming in. Thank you for the love messages. Bye.